Welcome to the Learner Centered Collaborative Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Martin, and today I'm excited to have Stephanie Malia Krauss join me to talk about how we thrive in a changing world. Stephanie is an educator, social worker, and mom of two school-aged kids. Through her experience teaching and running a school, she knows getting young people to succeed academically does not always mean they are healthy, happy, or ready for what comes next. This was true in her own life as a high school dropout. She needed people and opportunities within and beyond school to help her live and learn. Today, she works at the intersection of education, youth development, workforce development, and human services. And her work and writing focuses on what people need to build lives and futures they love. She's amazing and brilliant and has so much research and experience. So, welcome, Stephanie. I am so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Katie. I could not be happier to be in conversation with you.
So we were talking earlier, you are one of the very few repeat guests, but still, I want to start off with the same question in case people may not have been familiar with your work or some updated experiences. But can you just ground us a little bit in who you are beyond the bio and some of the experiences that have led you to do the work that you are doing today?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I am, and you said it in the bio, but I think it's really important. I'm a mom who's in the thick of it with my one Gen Alpha kid who's in seventh grade, and my other who technically is a Gen Alpha, but he told me yesterday he's a ninth grader that he will only ever claim being Gen Z. And so they have lived in such a rocky, unsettling, but also phenomenal time. And that has made up their lived experience. And when I think about my work, which you mentioned, I talk about my work as pre-K to pre-college. I started in a pre-kindergarten class and then was an elementary school teacher, a middle school coach, and ran a high school on a technical college campus. Um, the that work really led me to ask some core questions that I just couldn't resolve in the classroom. One was, what does it actually take to get young people ready for life and adulthood? And recognizing that completing a high school degree is rarely the same thing as truly being ready. And so this question of like, how do we prepare young people was core to my work, and core to my own experiences, as you mentioned, as a GED recipient myself and seeing school not work for me at times and then really work for me at other times. And then in my experience as a mom and watching the struggles and strengths that my kids have brought to their schooling experience through the pandemic and other times, this big question of like, how do we care for kids?
Mhm.
And so my work around preparing then moved into caring. And
I
this kind
love
of tracks the books that I wrote, right? So first was making it what today's kids need for tomorrow's world. How do we prepare them? And then was whole child, whole life. How do we care for them? Make sure they don't burn out or give up.
that.
But recently, in terms of folks getting to know me, I have just been in the thick of the overwhelm of modern life. I know that my normal and the pace of life is not natural. And like you, I'm on the road all the time with educators and youth workers in communities all across the US and the globe. And I've been polling them every single time that we get together and asking, how are your kids? How are your families? And how are you? And every community, regardless of where it is, it generates these word clouds. And the center says, we're overwhelmed, we're overloaded, we're stressed, and we're tired. And so I
Mhm.
think I'm coming to you today where I think about my work, it's moved from how do we prepare for the future to how do we care for these kids
Mhm.
to now like how do we repair where we are and reclaim what it takes to live and love our lives for our kids and for ourselves. So really
Yeah.
moving into collective care.
I love that. And it's great to hear the progression and kind of where you are. I often think about my own writing and how I go through those stages with my own kids. And what you said really resonated around like what they need to thrive. And just because they're, doing well academically or we're preparing them academically, sometimes that's counter to what we need to be those whole humans. And we see it, especially in the high schools. And there's this movement nationally, maybe internationally, really around like redesigning the high school experience, redesigning for young adolescents. I know we're both very steeped in young adolescent research and literature and what's needed, and our schools are not designed for what young adolescents really need to be able to thrive. And I know you've done all the research, so I'm excited to dig into that with you today.
Yeah, I think just to like set us up with this like little big look back at human history. So most of my work in writing in the past has focused on future signals.
Mhm.
What's going to happen as we move forward? What's the future of learning, the future of work? When I was researching how we thrive, I called it my look back to the future. I went back across the 300,000 years of human history and really paid attention to what are those essentials that across time and across context humans have always tapped into our superpowers in order to learn and work and live. And I think I was really struck by, and it really affirms the reimagining work that's been going on now for years in the high school space, that we've designed high school in response, of course, you and I know, like to industrialism, the factory model, but that's 300 years of a 300,000 year human history, which means that's 1% of human history. And then when we look at how we scrambled after the pandemic and
Mhm.
things like the over-reliance on devices, even when we got back into classrooms and other kind of lingering impacts, well, that past few years is just 1% of the 1% of human history. And so a lot of, I think, the reimagining work is really reclaiming work, saying, like, wait, that was just 1% of human history. How actually are we made to live and learn? And how could we design for that while also benefiting from the incredible advantages of innovation
Mhm.
and technological solution in a way that pulls the strength of what it means to be human and the support of what human ingenuity has created?
I love that. And so to kind of think about how do we reclaim that and rehuman our schools, our spaces. There's a lot of places that you talk about doing it, but for this purpose, we want to talk about our schools. And I was at an event last night with a community. It was a community forum, really looking at their strategic plan, looking at the last couple years, post-pandemic, and where would they want to go in the next couple years. It's a lovely community, and they all were coming together to center their strengths and things that they've been doing and really look forward. And one of the golden nuggets, we called it, was they said, we're really focusing on joyful play, learning, really aligned to what we know about the science of learning and development. So that was a big chunk, is that they were really being intentional about the learning, not just the worksheets and the materials they're handing kids and the standards, coupled with play and joy and nature and being outside and engaging in really authentic tasks and thinking about how to use technology effectively, right? Not ignoring the technology and resources, but there's been this pendulum swing of, everybody has technology, we have to use it all the time, we sit on screens, to now we see we have to get rid of the technology. And so I want to hear, like, from your research and what you're seeing, what are the opportunities for us to think more thoughtfully about technology and play and how we engage rather than these blanket sort of policies that don't really take in the science of learning and development and what we need in our classrooms.
Yeah, so let's pull back a little bit, you used a word that I've been talking a ton about since How We Thrive came out. And it was something that I coined after I did all of that polling of our adults who are caring for kids and working with young people. And it's this idea of rehumaning. So the like actual awareness that we have conditions in our schools and our homes and our workplaces that make it increasingly hard to tap into I call them like evolutionary endowments or human essentials, the parts of being human that most profoundly impact our ability to not only learn, but also like our physical and psychological health and well-being. And that it takes active practice and protection to safeguard them and to allow them to happen. Here's said another way. It's harder and harder to human right now and to protect the best parts of being human. And the best parts of being human also happen to be the things that allow us to do more quality learning and work. It's a win-win.
Hmm.
Instead, it's more common that schools find themselves in situations where, in an earnest and honest attempt to prepare kids, they're preparing them for what I call in the book the dangerous weather of modern life, like preparing them for the grind and constantly
Yeah.
overperforming and overproducing, preparing them for crowded calendars and saying, kind of, just you wait until you get to college or the workforce or an elementary school student. Just you wait till you get to middle and high school. It's going to be so much harder and so much faster. And so, this idea of rehumaning school is the honest assessment of how we're structured and what we're doing, and asking, kind of on a sliding scale or spectrum, to what degree are we, whether it's intentional or not, protecting and promoting
Hmm.
or prohibiting and restricting the very things that young people and their teachers
Hmm.
need to be not just healthy, happy, and whole, but also the best performers,
Right.
the best learners that they can be.
I
And
just want to,
so,
real quick, I want to double down on that. I think that what you said is so true. We are so conditioned, and there's so many ways we do this. Preparing, spending our days and years preparing for one test or preparing for, the exams or to getting into a school. So we're so focused on, like you said, that preparing for the bad weather. And that's so true. In elementary school, just wait, it's going to get so much harder. Like instead of just living in the moment and growing and being in the developmental needs and space and possibilities, it's always looking forward in such a narrow way
yeah.
that we're preparing people for things that maybe are not ideal instead of developing, as you say, the whole child for that whole life.
Yeah, 100%. I actually, in the book, so I work with a brilliant illustrator who's a educator and a dad, Manuel Herrera. And Manuel and I created in How We Thrive this cartoon that was inspired horribly and hilariously after a cartoon used often to talk about domestic violence. But it's the culture of like overworking harm, where a parent is just grinding at work and they have so much to do and they're so overwhelmed and they go home and, that's panel one. Work harder, produce more, go
Mhm.
faster. And then, in the case of the cartoon, mom goes home and the high school kid has like brought home a C on the test. And in the panel, she's yelling at him, like, you can do more, you can do better. And then he goes to his little brother who's playing with like an airplane toy in the cartoon and yells, like, just you wait, right? Like, just you wait until you get to high school. And I think, as you know, my younger son, Koa, wrote the foreword to the
Mhm.
book, and he talks about being 12 and how stressed and strained he already feels. And one of the things, I know we'll get to technology here in a second, but I think it's really important for folks to hear this. So I've been working for the last few months in Virginia on a listening tour of middle schoolers. And the reason why is I really have wanted, with this incredible alliance of youth development and education professionals, we wanted to get in and understand, in particular, how sixth graders are doing, because they
Mhm.
were our first group of kids who were COVID kindergartners. And one of the things, and we know that there are some lingering effects. We're hearing from
Mhm.
middle school folks all across the state and the country that, like, from an attendance perspective, a behavior
Yeah.
perspective, academically, there are some lingering impacts. And back to young adolescents, this is a prime time to double down
Right.
investments. But these kids are saying, we know that we missed things because of what happened to us, but we constantly feel like we're not measuring up.
Yeah.
Every communication that we get to show up more and to go faster and to make up for missed time is telling us we're not good enough and that something's wrong with us. And so there's a really eroding effect versus this kind of reimagining work or rehumaning work of what if we create the conditions for optimal learning and development? What do they actually look like? And I think to answer your technology piece directly, I'm a big believer in general of bodies before bots. When something can happen, right? Like you remember the old phrases. And so that's the one for me, bodies before bots. When technology can be used to amplify and advance incredible human experiences and conditions in a humane way, it actually brings us closer to the human connections,
Mhm.
experiences that we need and deserve. It's an incredible thing. And there are some unbelievable versions of humane tech and how we thrive. I talk about this awesome mentoring organization I Could Be that for 20 plus years has brought together kids with mentors
Mhm.
in an online space that just would not be possible otherwise. But it amplifies, it's like the salt to the human experience, right? It's not
Right.
detracting from it.
Yeah, this was even pre-pandemic. I we did research when I was at the University of San Diego on a big district that was going one to one with technology. So we're looking like 2017 when this was starting to happen. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be amazing. The kids are going to be so engaged, right? Like they're going to have their screens in the classroom, and all of a sudden we're going to fix this like disengagement problem we've had for years. And I listened to the kids, as you know, you listen and you get the right perspective, a different perspective than what you think is gonna happen. And they were like, we miss our teacher.
That's
And I was
right.
like, wait, what? And they were like, our teachers stopped talking to us. They got the computers and they stopped talking to us. They started communicating through chats. They started like monitoring kids from their desk. And it was just like, oh, it's just easier to like be omniscient and see what everyone's doing instead of get proximate and talk to kids. And the kids miss those relationships. So the engagement comes from the human connection, not just with their peers, but also with their teacher and doing things. And instead, we just brought everyone together and put them on computers. And then that was isolated maybe in pockets, but then we saw through the pandemic, I had this vision when you were talking about these sixth graders, and that instead of letting people out in the world, we brought kids home, sat them in front of a computer at home for 6 hours a day in most cases. And instead of like building that connection and letting them play and all of that. But what that's done is now in our classrooms, we see so much of that continuing of what I saw pre-pandemic, and the communication, all of that is even more pronounced through technology. And so you see this huge backlash.
That's right.
Um, because it's not necessarily the connective technology that we're talking about, but we're not it's not nuanced. The conversation feels like tech or no tech, screens or no screens, rather than how are we using the technology that we have available? How are we helping kids to think about, of course, how you use AI, and instead of screens or no screens feels like such a non-research based or uninformed
Yeah.
position to take rather than how we use those.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what have you seen? What's in the research around like how do we balance our classrooms that really, to your point, rehuman the like joy of learning, that outdoor sense of, wonder and play, while also using the innovative technologies and tools that we have for a modern world.
Yeah, absolutely. I was getting interviewed for an article the other day, and it was about like analog hobbies. And the journalist asked me, like, is it ever okay to use YouTube to, like learn one of these? And I said, absolutely. Like, if my child wanted to pick up on a hobby or do something outside, and it was a skill that I did not have, what an unbelievable thing that they could go and watch tutorial videos on YouTube and then try it, which is not to say that YouTube doesn't also produce content like shorts that are designed to harm and hook kids. But inside of that platform, you can find a both and. So
Mhm.
I want to say one thing about the technology piece and listening to our kids, and
Mhm.
then talk about what would it look like if we rehumaned school. So I was invited into some high school English classes the other day to talk to the kids about AI.
Mhm.
And I started with a similar poll to the one I told you about earlier, but this time I asked them, what are the words that come to mind when you think about AI and like the ways in which you're using it? And what I found was kids have a much more nuanced view of AI than we give them credit for. Up on the screen of this word cloud, I saw that these kids, every single class said, yeah, AI can be useful and helpful, but it can also be dangerous and harmful. And like,
Mhm.
we want to talk about that. And then they dug in deeper and said, it would be okay if AI lessened the burden for my teacher, but I don't want it to ever be my teacher.
Mhm.
So they really do have that wisdom that I think we have to tap into and we have to honor. And from my perspective, a lot of the over reliance on tech, what you're talking about with teachers who are like, well, I'm just going to do this online, or I'm just going to post it online, or keep the kids on computers. It is symptomatic of the overwhelm and the overload. It
Yeah.
feels like it's easier, even if it's not. And it's not because it's not as life-giving. You're not getting energy from the.
That's so true. Yeah, like it feels easier and I'm just going to do it, but it's like you're not connecting and feeling the reason we get into teaching. And it's not everywhere, but when you use the technology in that way and you're not having those opportunities to learn and connect, it definitely I can see it takes the joy out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about what it would look like to really rehuman school. So, across the research on not only human development, but evolutionary biology and epigenetics and neuroscience and little pocket disciplines, like the science of sleep and other things, what I found and wrote about in How We Thrive is we have 14 natural capacities that have the most profound impact on our ability to live, learn, work, and thrive. And when I talk about thriving, what I actually mean is I have what I need to endure challenges because
Mhm.
life is hard. I can get through the hard stuff. And I have what I need to enjoy life and just relish in the good stuff. And so together, I can have a good life, a life worth living. That is thriving. And so those 14 essentials in the book, just for ease, I categorize them under body, mind, heart, and spirit. So we'll try to do like a really rapid tour, including where technology can be supportive.
Okay.
So the body essentials include our natural capacities to eat and the benefits we get when we put fresh, healthy food in our body, to sleep, move, and regulate. So, from a science perspective, we know that a rehumaned learning environment, that rehumaning schools would include ensuring that our kids have access to fresh food and that they're eating at times that make sense for their biology and bodies. Right now, we have kids who are eating lunch at 10:15 in the morning or at 1:30 in the afternoon for 15 minutes, and like that's their one option. Technology could be used in much more powerful ways around master scheduling. Let's use it. Let's crunch all the various versions of the thing that every education leader hates, which is the horrors of scheduling. Sleep is another one. And we know that outside of the state that you call home, most places still start school way too early for kids. And so the science is unequivocal that for our adolescents, our tweens, teens, and young adults, they should have nothing before 8:30 in the
Yeah.
morning. I mean, it's
I was thinking today getting up like, oh my gosh, like I used to have to be at school at starting at 7 o'clock in the morning.
yes.
That is way too early to start school.
Yeah, so my older son is a high school athlete, and his typical day starts at 6 o'clock in the morning to catch the bus. And then he's not done until 11 because he's a baseball player.
Oh,
So those games are, we were at a 3-hour game that was home yesterday. Well, if he was driving to the team he faced, that would have been 5 hours after school, plus studying for the geography test and doing his regular homework. So sleep, I talk in the book about like imagining snug student campaigns because it's not only about the school start times, it's also about recognizing sleep as a school supply. So in Southern California at the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent, the co-director, Adriana Galvan, she talks about how in her research, just having the right pillow could be like the single most important thing that you need. And so much of sleep is where we do the memory and learning and processing. So I started to imagine like what would it look like if local schools just connected with their like local mattress shop or their local Target or whoever. And when they did supply drives, people could come in and like lay on the bed and get a good pillow. It wouldn't take an obscene amount of money, but it would have a profoundly outsized impact. So,
I think you have an I've never in a million years would have thought about that, but a good
right?
pillow makes a difference.
Yeah, and as it turns out, we sleep for more than a third of our life, which is crazy. So quickly, the other two body essentials are movement. And I think the thing for us to know for rehumaning school is that researchers now say that sitting is the new smoking, that if we sit for 6 hours a day, it is from a physical harm perspective, the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And we often restrict it and call that good classroom management. So we have
Mm,
kids whose bodies know that they need to move, and moving can often be vital for learning as well. But then
yeah.
they're told to sit down, to sit still, to not go in the hallway. And so we have to find ways in a rehuman school where kids are eating fresh food when they're hungry, they're getting the sleep that they need through start times and also like the conditions at night, and they're able to move their bodies, frequently. And then the
Hmm.
last part is regulation, which is just to say that like we often, the signs of dysregulation match almost entirely to I'm doing air quotes for people who are listening, the bad behaviors that we see and discipline in school because it's the absence of executive functioning. These are kids who are more irritable and irrational and fidgety and anxious and hyper aroused or hypo aroused. And so, if we think about rehumaning school, any time that we're training staff on classroom management or discipline, we're also training them on the science of regulation because we don't learn that in school. Like we have,
Right. And I want to pause you there because more and more, I think you probably hear this too, that like the behaviors are out of control, right? And teachers are frustrated because they're expected to keep kids sitting, keep kids managed. So as you said, and they're finding more and more behaviors, and
That's right.
they're really struggling to manage a classroom like that. And instead of saying, let's get kids moving
That's
and
right.
let's get kids connected, we're trying to like put the genie back in the bottle of like, no, just keep sitting for longer. And for many, they're finding it's not working, but it's really, really hard for a lot of teachers to figure out how they can manage all of these things. So,
And so this is where it gets really cool and it connects with the conversation you were having yesterday about getting outside and play and joy. So the next four essentials are the essentials of the mind, and they're play, wonder, flow, and create. The very things that the school you were with yesterday wanted to focus on.
mhm,
So what these teachers are experiencing with the increased behavior, I went and interviewed over a dozen leading camp professionals. So, executive directors of camps and camp program leaders and counselors. And the key thing that they train staff. So, if you're going to go to a summer sleepaway camp,
mhm,
camp leaders train their staff to know that behavior is communication. Whatever we are seeing is showing us what kids need. So, what we're seeing in the classrooms, and it's happening everywhere, these
mhm,
increases in behavior, kids' bodies are screaming, I need to move, I need to regulate. Things aren't right here. This normal isn't natural. So it's really cool about the mind essentials is when I was writing the book, I actually went to sleepaway camp. I volunteered for a
I love that.
week to see it in action. And this is a place where play and wonder, radical curiosity, flow, doing things for the sheer pleasure of it, but also like practicing over and over again. Like think about archery. You're doing the
Mhm,
same thing and you kind of get in the zone. And then creativity. Those are prime strengths of camp.
mhm,
When those things are happening, my observations when I volunteered at this camp, but also firmed up by every other camp leader I talked to, is that behaviors go way down because kids are learning, they're developing, and they're regulating.
yeah.
It really taps in to all the things all at one time. So, rehumaning schools would say anytime we're talking about student-centered learning, anytime we're talking about experiential learning, competency-based learning, any of those things, that it should be playful, it should cultivate radical curiosity, it should create opportunities for kids to find and enjoy flow, and it should tap into creativity. And I think what you and I both know from being in the high school space and the student-centered learning space for so long is sometimes when high schools focus so much on college and career readiness, they let go of play or they
Mhm,
let go of wonder. And what we know again from human history is, if you look at any hunter-gatherer society, young people up until adulthood spent about a third of their time playing. And playing
mhm.
can be internships and projects, right? And
Yeah.
simulations. Play doesn't have to be child's play, but we still need it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Being with high schoolers yesterday and having them talk about what they need. We've said for so long, mainly, the No Child Left Behind era, that we're really focused on college and career, but we've really been focused on college. And in that college conversation, there's very little about career. And so we're focused on getting good grades and the GPA to get into the college. And then all of a sudden, kids are like leaving high school going, I have to pick a major, but I don't
That's
have experience. I don't have exposure. I'm literally just like pulling from maybe what my parents want me to be or what I've seen. Um, and so the kids yesterday were like, even from elementary, like help us be exposed and have experience in these spaces, going to visit different careers and talking about internships, exactly that, so that they have opportunities beyond the academic classroom to understand how their own strengths and interests connect to this world so that when they go to college or they pick a different pathway, it's intentional and they've been able to wonder and they've been able to like decide I like this or I don't, rather than just a purely theoretical academic exercise. And like you said before, preparing for the bad weather, just put your head down and do it so that you can have a job. How much better prepared to make these choices they are when they can play and wonder and actually experience some of these things before they have to make choices that do affect their next steps.
That's right. Yeah, the science on play is really incredible. And I benefited a lot from the Institute of Play and the founder, Stuart Brown, and learning from him that like play is, it prepares us. It gives us a safe place to test out different
Mhm.
things and figure out what works and what doesn't without the real life consequences. And the other thing, I buried a lead in this conversation is that for years, I worked on the higher ed and post-secondary side with Jobs for the Future, Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, doing partnerships with Lumina Foundation, a higher ed funder. And so I'm speaking out of a place of knowing that disconnect between K-12 schools focus on an outdated picture of
Mhm.
what post-secondary readiness requires when really, and I've written some chapters on this, I call it the 60 or 70-year career. Our kids potentially could live a 100-year life as an expectation, not an exception. Just technology can keep us alive longer. And that doesn't mean the quality of life will improve. It just means we stay alive. And so, if our kids, you and I are parents of teens, like if our own children are looking at the possibility of a 60-year career or a 70-year working life, that's a whole lifetime. And they, right? Like, we cannot do a handoff at 18 when that's not even a quarter of the way into that possible 100-year life. And so it's something for us to consider. So I know that we're up on time, so I just want to flag what the other essentials are and say that
Okay.
for these, what rehumaning school looks like is really addressing culture and climate and the supports and services we give to young people. So there are essentials of the heart, and that's connection, human connection. This is again bodies before bots, love. So really our experience of providing affection and connection to our kids and professional love is a thing that we need to be talking about and thinking about, and belonging. And there's increased research coming out on belonging. I will say, as a quick commentary, that I worry about people saying, take all the tech out of classrooms, it will solve everything, or just focus on belonging, it will solve everything.
Yep.
There is a time, take all of the addictive, inhumane tech out of classrooms 100% and absolutely triple down on belonging. Also, if you want the results, you got to do the whole rehumaning. And then there are spirit essentials, which are celebrating, contributing, and belief, which is hope and belief. I talk about it as belief in something bigger or better. We
Hmm.
need in our schools a culture of celebration. There's such cool research also, and like if I share good news with you in the hallway, how it
Hmm.
benefits, it's a boost to both of us. This is the joy that your school talked about. It absolutely amplifies learning and it enlivens it. It just makes it more pleasurable. And contribution. People want jobs. Like in your
Yes.
schools, kids, the best way to have them own the space is give them something to do and focus on sparking their interests. So that's like, the tour de force. Obviously, How We Thrive in the book dives so deep. I interviewed over 100 scholars and experts. There are like 500 research citations. But I think this is, for me, writing this book ruined me, Katie, because you and I have been in the learner-centered space for a long time, in the high school redesign space for a long time. And I think I came out of this realizing that we focus so much on changing the curriculum and the structure of the academics, but some of these things like sleep and movement and play, they don't get the attention they need, and we're really, really missing out. And so I want to be working with schools who sort of open up and say, okay, how could we really rehuman this place for the kids and the adults in our building and take on this like next generation of human-centered work?
Yep. I think it's so important as we think about redesign to be thinking about all of those pieces. All right, I'm going to do a quick rapid fire so we
Okay.
can, I know we're at time, but so what is one thing we should stop doing?
We should stop assigning homework.
Great. What's one thing we should start doing?
Really managing what we're expecting middle and high school kids to do before 8:30 in the morning.
Love it. What's one thing we should keep doing?
Loving kids and telling them we love them, or telling them we care if we can't say love.
What is one thing that you are grateful for right now?
I am so grateful to Katie and I are a part of a vibrant community of people who have very busy working lives in this space and who also try to write and distill. And Katie, you are out so regularly, not just with your incredible book, but your regular newsletters being like, let me tell you the bright spots. Like, here is the hope, and here is what it looks like so practically. And it's a challenging time, and we need that hope and we need those concrete examples and friends. We need
Thank you.
friends.
Friends and support. Absolutely grateful for you too. Final question. What is your hope for the future of education?
I want to see districts and schools commit to rehumaning. I think that we are missing the boat, that we need to be reimagining our student support services. And there's so much we didn't talk about, like protecting recess and PE and our extracurriculars. And it would be radical and wonderful to see people take on that level of human care.
Well, let's do it. Let's keep working together and make it happen. Thank
Awesome. Thanks.
you for being here. Thank you for your work and your friendship.
Absolutely. Such a joy.